we're in a nice position as women that people are trying to create more leadership opportunities for women, right? So there's no shortage often of doors being opened. But I read a great book recently, and I'm forgetting where it was, where it said, if you don't make a choice, people will make a choice for you.
Hello and a very warm welcome to How Do You Do It? A podcast for all those who want to be inspired and get more out of life. If you want tools and advice to live a better life, then you've come to the right place. Hello. Welcome to episode 2, season 2. If you're new to the podcast, I'm Naomi and I hope that you enjoy it. If you're a regular, thanks again for listening. I appreciate you. I'm going to continue doing the shout outs. So if you've sent me a personal message, I'm going to do my best to try and remember. This week, Kelly Bader, thanks for sharing the podcast and writing a positive message on social media. Another shout out to Beth Dawson, who continues to support the podcast. Thank you very much. You are appreciated. So this episode is an interesting one. It's about something that I really am interested in and fascinated by, and that is the changing nature of leadership and the way that we as a society see leadership. I think that in the current world, with amazing researchers like Dr. Brené Brown, who's also a best-selling author, we are able to really reassess the way that we see leadership. We're able to identify that often the best and most effective leaders are not what we used to define as leaders in the past. So because of Dr. Brené Brown, we can see that somebody can really be an effective leader by being empathic, by being an excellent communicator, by being somebody who places their values before anything else, and somebody who really doesn't fear vulnerability but sees it as a tool. And I guess when we're vulnerable with others, we give them permission to be vulnerable with us. But as Dr. Brené Brown says, being vulnerable with boundaries. So they're the things, that's the way that I feel about leadership. And that's why I love Dr. Brené Brown so much. But who I have on the podcast today, it's kind of exciting, is somebody who is an expert consultant when it comes to leadership. So Natacha Catalino works with one of the world's best consultancy firms, where she is a leadership development consultant. She also happens to be a mother of 4, and that's, I guess, a great place to start leading. That's one of the toughest jobs to be a leader in. So she's a mother of 4. She's a global nomad. She has spent the past decade seeking her version of having it all. Professionally, Natacha is an economist by training. She's worked, as I said, for an international firm for almost 13 years. She focuses on helping others to be at their best through leadership development and culture transformation. At home, Natacha has 4 daughters who've lived as global citizens in England, Switzerland, China, Turkey, and now the US. As part of a dual career couple, she has varied her work-home balance from 0% to 100%. Currently working 50%, but really being smart enough to know when she needs to lean in and out. To hold it all together, she loves yoga, meditation, tennis, and long walks. One of her favorite quotes happens to be one of my favorites as well, and it's Rumi's quote, "Yesterday I was clever, so I wanted to change the world. Today I am wise, so I am changing myself." Welcome to the podcast, Natacha Catalino. Hello, Natacha.
Hi, Naomi. How are you?
Good. How are you?
All right. You've got me. This is, my first morning of the meeting of the day is always like I'm just recovering from the morning shift. So I apologize.
I can imagine.
A few minutes late.
No problem at all. I'm recording now, but it's up to you when we start actually using it for the interview.
Cool.
So
well,
sure.
we'll chat and you can decide what's worthy of
Okay. All right. Well, Well, I'm going to say hello again and we'll just start fresh and then see how it goes. Okay.
Cool.
Thanks so much for joining me, Natasha. Thank you for coming on. And I'm so excited because I haven't seen you since you were living here in Basel in Switzerland, which was almost 6 months ago or even more.
A year ago now. It's really
oh my
lovely to see you again.
I know, it's really nice to see you. And how's life in the States?
Well, life in the States is pretty crazy. Definitely not what we expected, I guess, when we left a year ago. But, I think we were very lucky and we're really making the best of a challenging situation. So, for us, pretty comfortable and nice, but not normal in any way.
Yeah, I can imagine. So you are a leadership coach, right? A development leadership coach. You're a TED Talk speaker. Congratulations. I saw it's like almost 50,000 views it's had, and I'm sure even more because it's been shared on so many platforms. Your TED Talk, your TEDx talk that you did right here in Basel. Still, I think that's always going to be very relevant. Well, hopefully not always, but in this climate, I guess, even more so with a lot of women working from home, with their husbands working from home too. But we'll talk about that in a moment. And you're the mother of 4. So I've always been super inspired by you. Now, as a transformation coach, I had a question for you. What do you think is the hardest thing for leaders to overcome?
Oh, good question. So I think, Naomi, that the hardest thing for leaders these days is that many leaders grew up learning how to lead in a complicated world. And the world these days has shifted from being complicated to complex. And as leaders are essentially equipped to operate very effectively in a complicated world, but that way of operating doesn't serve them well in a complex world. And the difference between operating in a complicated and a complex world is the state of mind of the leaders. And so it really requires personal transformation. And that's much more difficult to do than implement a new business solution of some sort. So I think that's the biggest challenge.
Okay. How does one transform themselves? I think that's, as you say, it's very hard to do. But what's the first step for somebody who's, used to doing things a certain way, but needs to have more of a growth mindset, I guess?
So I think the first thing is being able to recognize when things are complex, not complicated. So to give you, a home environment, I've just, got my 4 kids off this morning before talking to you. A complicated challenge in the home world would be, I've got 4 kids, 4 different after-school activities, and I need to arrange drop-offs and pick-offs of the appropriate locations and times for these 4 kids. And now it's not simple to figure out, and it's probably going to cost me quite a lot of money because one single person can't do it. But there is an optimization. I'm sure if I had the FedEx delivery software package, it would make it more easy for me to figure out. But with some smart optimization, I can figure that problem out, right?
Yes.
A complex problem is, how do I manage homeschooling for children when the schools may be open, may be closed, we have 2 jobs to manage? This is a problem that has never been figured out before. So you can't ask the experts, and you have to think creatively.
Yes.
So to be able to sort of step back and be like, okay, my standard style of like, we'll figure this out, doesn't actually work, right?
Yeah.
So I think that number one, can you notice that this is complex, not complicated? Another area where I see this, a common area where I see this happening is in the business world, is around diversity and inclusion. This is such a complex problem that throwing a few initiatives at it, some unconscious bias training or some women's leadership training, doesn't solve it. You have to think about it differently. So number one, I notice this is complex, not complicated. Number two, my own inner state. I have to shift from a fear-based place. Sometimes we use the language of reactive to creative, but essentially is, am I operating in fear? Oh God, if I don't sort this out, then like bad stuff's going to happen. And when we're in fear, it drives us to be controlling, or to sort of be pleasing, or to be critical in the way we think about things. And I tell you where you see that a lot, if you read any of these Facebook groups, that fear-based conversation is so prevalent, right?
Yes.
so to shift out of that mindset into a creative one where you're not sitting from a place of, oh God, it's going to be awful if I don't sort this out, but what could be possible if I thought about this differently? And
I like that.
It's so easy to get sucked back into it. I mean, I'll share with you a personal story with the homeschooling one.
Yeah.
We sit here, I mean, today in the US, we've got no idea when school's going back. They just said it's probably going to go back 2 weeks later than originally planned. And when it goes back, whether it will be remote, in person, or some combination, right? Which creates a massive amount of uncertainty. And the fear-based approach would be like, oh God, how am I going to cope? What am I going to do? I'm at the mercy of these schools. Please tell me what's happening.
Yes.
The creative response is to say, if I was to blank sheet what I wanted for my child's education experience to be this year, what would I build? What would I create for them that had academic, that had social, that had outdoors? And how can I make something amazing out of that? Now, when I'm thinking that ways, of course I talk to other people to get ideas and stuff, but occasionally I'll hear someone say, oh, well, I've sent my kids to private school X and they're starting in person on this day. And I get hit by that very natural fear-based, oh God, my kids are going to miss out. And, I have to make sure they don't miss out. And then I'm like, Natasha, take a breath, calm down. That fear-based reaction doesn't help you to solve these things creatively. Breathe.
Do you know what I find? And I'm sure you could relate as a parent, is that when I am very tired, say my son's had a nightmare, it's come into our bed, I haven't slept very well, those are the times where that fear-based voice is the most vocal. When you're exhausted, you haven't had time to get up and meditate or do yoga, all these amazing morning routines that, science tells us work. What advice do you have for people who do not have time for that self-care on certain days? Obviously, we should all try to have a plan long-term to look after ourselves. But that's when I find that voice is the most vocal, and it's not easy for me to switch off and have a more logical approach. So what kind of advice do you have people, or parents especially, who are busy in these situations?
Yeah, it's such a great observation, Naomi. It's when we are at our least internally resourced that we get so easily sucked into this fear-based mindset. So I think there's two things. I think there's finding times to replenish the tank when you're not in the busy times. So that's one piece, is that clearly, there are days when there's absolutely no time for self-care, but there are other days and moments and vacations when there is time for self-care. But how often in those times do we maybe treat ourselves to a movie or drinks with friends, but we don't actually, right? And it's another form of self-care. But are we also doing yoga and meditating and sleeping more in those moments? So I think about the sort of long-term replenishing the tank. I mean, I just took 3 months off work after the move from Basel to Boston to deeply replenish my tank, because I was so depleted from everything that the move took. And so that was a radical form of self-replenishment.
That's
right?
Good. Yeah.
And I was noticing that my tank was so empty. I couldn't in the day-to-day do these other things, which I'm going to now talk about. And so I needed a deep replenishment. So find ways of doing that. Like a 3-month health leave is a radical form of that, but there are other ways of prioritizing that. And then in the day-to-day, in the ideal world, I take 10 minutes. In Basel, it used to be sitting in my car after I dropped the kids off and before I walked into the office for literally 10-minute meditation breathing that just allowed me to reset from my one job to my other job.
What a great idea.
And that was a very sort of small but really smooth transition point. But if you really are in the midst of a crazy day and you don't have time even for 10 minutes, I feel like small practices. So just the 3 breaths, right? When you notice, sort of becoming aware of the bodily symptoms of like, whoa, I'm feeling great anxiety, stress in this moment, breathe, is one small practice. And the other is to have another sort of bodily anchor, like, okay, feet on the floor. So just something that allows you to, it doesn't take more than a nanosecond, but allows you to reground so you can bring something of your better self in a stressful, awkward moment. So I think those are 2. But then I think the third one is deepening your awareness of where your attention gets sucked.
Yeah.
I think it's fascinating today that, especially with the world of electronics,
Yes.
it's a competition for our attention. And these practices that we know are good for us require our attention, but so often we are unknowingly giving our attention to Facebook. And
Facebook,
actually,
negative posts.
yeah, the 5 minutes that I spend flicking through Facebook between a meeting, whatever, it's like, why am I not spending that actually on something replenishing for myself?
That's very true. And it is where you focus and draw your attention. It's true even for my children. I notice, like, when my son watches something positive, we're going through like re-sleep training now. When he watches something positive, he sleeps so well. But when he's watching like the Star Wars Lego movie at his age, he's not, his mind's, so it's back to basics of what we're focusing on and being more positive with our approach and switching the negative off, which is not easy, especially when you have negative people in your life. Which draws me, so you as a transformation coach in the workplace, I'm sure that there are sometimes people who probably don't mean to be, but based on situations in their own life, can be toxic or negative in the workplace. What advice do you have for people in the workplace who are trying to transform an environment and make it more positive? Or even just individuals trying to go to work and want to just have a good day right from the outset, but then they have a good friend who they love with all their heart, but tends to always be negative.
It's a great question, Naomi. So you've reminded me actually of a dear colleague and friend, Caroline Webb, who wrote a book, which I highly recommend, called How to Have a Good Day. And it's an entire 300 plus pages on this topic. So
wow.
a really great read that I recommend. And she covers many of, again, the sort of the micro things that you can do to shift your attention towards the positive, and to reframe situations and to help colleagues reframe. So it's a really great book, and I'll pick up on maybe a few different things, some
Sure.
from the book, some others. So firstly, I think in the face of a negative, challenging person who's maybe fear-based or in the reactive, the first thing that I've learned is to, rather than being judgmental of, oh my God, what a blur,
Yes.
to have compassion,
mm-hmm.
and to be able to look at that person and feel an understanding and compassion for them, that for whatever they're going through, whatever stage of their development they're at, that's the way they're showing up, and not to judge.
I really like
It's
that. Yeah.
so much easier to face them with love than with judgment and criticism. So that's not always easy to do, but I find to be able to ask yourself, what could be going on for this person that is causing them to show up like this? So curiosity, if you're struggling with love, curiosity is maybe a smaller and easier step of like,
I wonder what's happened.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I think curiosity is a really helpful mechanism of reframing from judgment and criticism to better understanding. And then I think the second is around attention. It's funny, my daughter and I went on a walk yesterday, and she was like, Mom, we watched this amazing show with Dad last night. It's all about how the brain works. And she'd, I have to follow up with you and tell you what the show was, but she had learned that our brains cannot focus on the billions of bytes of information that they receive in any moment. And so they learn to focus. And so in this particular movie, there'd been a card trick going on. And during the card trick, 8 different things in the background, clothes, people had changed. And of course, the attention was drawn to the card trick. So she didn't notice all these other changes, right? And in the same way, if we go into a day or a conversation or an interaction with our attention on, oh God, I've got to interact with Joe, he's such a blur.
Yeah.
Our attention is automatically going towards this negative thing. And therefore, we look for evidence, we look for signs to confirm our hypothesis. And we miss all these surprising and interesting ways in which maybe Joe isn't being a pain that day. And so this is the way our brains work. And how to overcome this is to actively set an intention, right? It could be an intention of, I'm just going to notice and express gratitude today for the things my colleagues do that help me. Or, another intention might be, my intention for this meeting is that we really get to outcome X and we don't get derailed. So positive intention also helps draw your attention to what you want to focus on.
I really like that. And it reminds me of that saying, you know, where focus goes, energy flows. It's so true. Wherever we focus, our energy goes there. But again, this is all these things are the things that I love that you gave me those little tips and gave people those tips of what you can do when you are busy and when you are tired. And often it's just focus on your breathing or focus on your feet on the ground, because when you're really busy, it's really hard to have those intentions. And, you know, but when you actually remind yourself, okay, we want to achieve this outcome, rather than be emotional, etc., you're going to focus on that outcome and ignore any negative comment and just move on with it, which is really cool. I really love that. So you've worked, yeah, did you have something to add? Or
well, yeah, one thing to add, Naomi, that when I think about those micro practices, there's also a meta practice which helps in the busy days, and it's this clarity on what matters most. Because when you said when you're really busy, you reminded me sometimes we get really busy doing stuff that actually isn't meaningful. And so the other practice is to filter out the pointless busyness by having this really clear filter of what's most important to me. So how I use this practice is in my work. About 10 years ago, I took the time to clarify this for myself. And I realized that the thing that really drives me is I'm passionate about helping others to be at their best. And so I use this as a filter for whatever work I choose to say yes to, is that the first thing I'll ask myself is this meaningful work that will enable me to help others to be at their best? And I say no to a lot of work that doesn't fit with that.
Yes.
I have another criterion for myself is this going to allow me to grow and learn, right? So I sort of have a few, but they're not many, really clear filters that fit with that. And so that often takes out the busyness. You know, people ask all the time for one-on-one, can you help me with this? Can you help me with that? And I use that same filter. Can I help this person meaningful in a way that makes it worth me doing this, right? So that's one thing. And then the other thing is reassessing it when things change. So in COVID, I had a job and I had these 4 kids, which suddenly were at home with this massive turmoil and uncertainty. And my other filter, which allows me to manage work and home, is I'm committed to being a present parent. And when I had this trade-off, it wasn't about what work I said yes to. It was stepping back and going like, hang on, what's more important here? And it was no question more important to me to be a present parent, to help my kids through this crazy uncertainty. And therefore, it was very easy for me to essentially step back from work for a few months and be like, the most important thing right now is that I'm helping my children. And that was, I think, had I not had those clear filters, I would have just been stuck. I mean, it was already hectic and busy, but it would have been so much work had I been trying to maintain my previous level of work intensity on top. And I just realized there's a limit, a human limit. And with that human limit, I need to prioritize.
So really setting again, like what is the most important thing to me? I read that in 2009, you founded and led Mackenzie's Remarkable Women program, right? And you were saying that you had to say no to a lot of things. And so we often read that this is often something that women struggle with, saying no to a lot of things because I don't know if it's like societal expectations of how nice women should be, etc. So what is your advice, especially to women in the workplace who are trying to be more assertive in the way that they lead or make decisions or even step back? Because we hear a lot about leaning in, but I think it's just as important to step back sometimes and lean out, if you like. So what is your advice to women? And I love, I guess you already covered it in saying that, find out what the most important thing is to you and go from there. But what other kind of tactical tips do you have?
So you're spot on. That initial thing, grow for them, but they might be the smaller or the easier thing to do, and we might shy away from something that is in line with our purpose, that we will learn and grow from, but feels too big and scary. And if you're thinking about actually which opportunity you should take, we should be bolder and braver and bite off the bigger thing. But we have this risk aversion, this fear of failure, that means we sometimes don't. And it's rare that these opportunities are sort of placed on a plate at the same time in front of us, that we have to choose between the smaller or the bigger. They often come sequentially. But we should hold back from the things, the job application thing. If you can do 80% of the things in job requirement, a woman will apply. And if they can't even do 50 things on the requirement list, a man will apply. And we should use that same consciousness to what we say yes to, even not applying for a new job, but within our current role. Are you staying in your comfort zone, or are you stepping out of it?
That's a really good point. And I was thinking about this. It's funny because I read this TED article recently, and it was about men who are often charismatic and sometimes even narcissistic, but they're often chosen as leaders because of society's view of what a leader looks like. And it's not necessarily what a good leader is. And so I think a lot of it is about really, I guess, rebranding the way that we see the word leader, because sometimes the best leaders are working behind the scenes, or they're more logical than emotional, and they're not always the best speakers. Depending on what company they work for, they might not need to be. So I think that's part of the issue as well. So do you think maybe women have a certain idea, and maybe based on historically what leaders look like, and they think, oh, I'm not like that, so I'm not competent to do this job, which they very well are competent to do? So do you think that's part of the problem as well?
Absolutely, Naomi. I see this all the time. I'm actually remembering clearly a quote from one of the women participants in our program. We explore our strengths a lot on our leadership program. I really believe in positive psychology and the power of playing to our strengths. And one of the first things we realize is that many of these very competent, very senior women are not even aware of some of their strengths. So number one, starting to acknowledge and become aware of the innate strengths that they have in them. And that in itself is a very powerful step of owning their strengths. But then what we often see is the profile of these women's strengths are not the classic profile of, your male CEO. And so the next step is to recognize that these strengths are indeed leadership strengths. And we have a whole bunch of exercises which enable these women to see themselves as leaders, firstly as full of strengths and then as leaders. And one woman, she said, I'm trying to remember the exact words, I'd never seen myself as a leader before because I'd never seen anyone with the sort of strengths that I had. But through this work, she was like, oh my goodness, like I am a leader too. And It was that too, because there are different ways of being a leader, but there's such a lack of role models that even when you become aware of your strengths, you might still not think you're a leader. And I spend a lot of time working with organizations because, a good organization will have a well-defined leadership model. And even if the leadership model doesn't say explicitly, command and control or directive, it's often implicit in the next level down of what it's looking for. And so deep listening and collaboration are, empathy, often really valuable skills that we tend to see more frequently in women. We can classify strengths as more feminine, more masculine. It doesn't mean that women have the feminine ones and men have the masculine ones. In fact, we have a mix, but you see them more frequently in women. But the leadership models and the performance management reviews of companies are not appreciating and putting emphasis on them. Very and so true. There's a sort of an inner piece, which is seeing yourself as a leader. And then there's an outer piece, which is companies recognizing, acknowledging, and rewarding and promoting people who exhibit these more feminine skills. And the sort of the final piece of this is that going back to where we started at the beginning, talking about complexity, expertise, direction, command and control style leadership are very useful strengths in a complicated world, because that confidence of, I've seen this before, this is what we should do, go forth and execute, works well with complicated. Complexity requires an ability to listen to the system, to draw in different points of views, to have a vision, and then to explore together creatively how you might achieve that. And actually, there's a lot of feminine strengths that support leadership in complexity. And so whether it's men or women leading, whoever's leading needs more of these creative strengths that women often have more naturally.
It's very true. Wow. And the research, it's interesting because the research is all saying that we need all these different skills, but the companies are not really taking on the research, and there's a massive lag and delay. And I guess it depends what company you work for, but generally that's the way that it is. Why do you think that's the case? Because I know companies have so much access to information now about what works and what doesn't, but there is a massive delay. Is it because a lot of conservative leaders are holding positions, or is it because it looks good to say we're doing this when we're not actually changing the way that we review and look at things? What do you think the delay is, in your opinion?
Oh, that is a difficult question. I feel like knowing the answer and being able to execute on it would unlock a whole bunch of potential.
Fair enough. That's fair enough.
So I had a few things. I think a lot of it is unconscious. I often say when I'm working on gender topics with organizations, there's often no bad intention, but there's total blindness. And I think it would be very difficult to do this work on diversity and inclusion if you assume bad intent. But as we're seeing in the recent race topics, actually intent isn't what matters, action is what matters. But it is positive intention, but unconscious bias and unawareness, or lack of awareness that we even are placing value on these masculine leadership strengths is part of the problem. So just raising awareness that there are different and more effective ways of leading. All of us are guilty of what made us successful till now. We sort of innately assume that if we keep on doing the same thing, it will continue to make us successful. So it's a very natural assumption for people who are in positions of power, leadership positions, to say, well, we had leaders who looked like this for the last 20 years. We should be looking for more leaders like that, right? It's a sort of natural and understandable assumption, but it's completely false. And I see this in the way people even put job openings, looking for your recruitment positions, that they will express what they're looking for in a leader. And the recruitment agency might say, well, we have no one that can do that, or you'll find no woman or person of color that has those, that fulfills those criteria. What about if you drop this or this, or added this? And there's a real discomfort with making a description for a job that doesn't look like what you know has succeeded in the past. We as human beings cling to certainty. And so I think that's another part of it.
It's courage, isn't it? It takes a lot of courage to say, I know this is how we've always done this. And it's, I guess, back to a lot of Brene Brown's work, like it's saying that, you know, I know we've done it this way, but I think if we have the courage to try something new that's more inclusive, we can succeed. And that's not very easy to do in every workplace. So, and right. I think, yeah, I think that definitely is the courage to, let's change this job description. Let's try something new. Because then if you're the one who speaks up about it and it doesn't go well, it's kind of on you. But if you own it and say, okay, well, we tried, let's try again, then, you know, so a lot of courage involved, I think.
Right. And it goes actually about, we talked earlier about being fear-based, and there is something about fear that comes into this as well. And again, this might be on a subconscious level, but all of us are out to essentially protect ourselves in some ways as we, you know, work to make the world a better place. And so there is a natural fear. If you as a leader that maybe has this traditional set of leadership skills, say, actually, what we really need is this new set of leadership skills. If you become conscious of that, there's a fear of one's own irrelevance. And it takes a very conscious, evolved leader to be willing to invite difference and invite other into the leadership roles, recognizing that they are becoming more quickly irrelevant. And I think that fear is very valid. Often the way we even couch diversity and inclusion topics, it's like, oh, well, more women in or more people of color in and me out, or that fear. And it doesn't necessarily have to be that way, but people are always looking for what's in it for me, and that really gets in the way, I think.
Yeah. Well, I love your work, Natasha. I really do. I love your philosophy about changing and transforming leadership. Do you have anything that you wanted to add about what you think are key traits for leaders now, or people who want to work on their leadership skills from within? Like you said right at the beginning, is there a key trait that we should, is it maybe self-awareness? That's what I can feel that we all need to have more of, that self-awareness, which takes time to build.
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of emphasis in the past, and I still see this, for example, in the medical profession. If you think about leaders in the medical profession, they become leaders by being really good surgeons or really good doctors, really good practitioners of their trade. And nowhere along the line are they told, well, they get given more and more responsibility, but the responsibilities they're given are not in line with their skills that they're proven and trained in, right? They're given leadership roles, and yet they have medical skills. And the leadership roles require a very different skill set. And a few of the, I think the fundamental skills that one requires to be a good leader is indeed self-awareness. And that in itself is a lifelong journey. But humility, right? All of us are learning, and we're not going to get this right. This whole idea of being comfortable with imperfection and vulnerability, of showing up the way we are. And curiosity about one's own growth, curiosity about others. So if one can cultivate those skills, I think that's the first step.
I really like that. And I really like understanding that leadership skills and the skills that you have for your everyday job are totally different. And I think a lot of people forget that. Okay, let's have fun. That was your fountain of knowledge. Thank you so much. Let's have some fun with this and that questions. Okay, so vanilla or chocolate?
Chocolate.
A book or a movie?
Book.
Savory or sweet?
Sweet every time.
Flats or heels?
Flats.
Pineapple on pizza, yes or no?
Oh God, no way. What a way to ruin a good pizza.
I love people's reactions to that last question. Thank you. Thank you so, so very much. Thanks for coming on to the podcast and the show on video. I'll just stop recording. Hey guys, I really hope that you enjoyed listening to the podcast. Now, I love speaking to Natacha. I've known her for a while, especially from when she lived in Basel. I find her incredibly amazing and inspiring because I guess, she's a mom, and she's also somebody who has a very authentic perspective on leadership. There are so many key takeaways from Natacha, but for me, I think it's about the way that she defines leadership and the way that she sees that we all have leadership traits, and that it's all about really accepting ourselves for our qualities. And she says when she's training people, especially new leaders, they often have this perception of what leadership is. And when Natacha explains to them how diverse leaders can be and yet effective regardless of what their strengths are, often people say, wow, I'm a leader too. So think about your own life and open your mind to the definition of leadership. You could be leading as a mother, as a parent, as a friend. You could be leading in an organization. Leadership is about being your effective leadership is about being your best self and helping others be their best self, but also identifying when you can't be your best self and knowing when to seek help or lean out and really put yourself first. In the sense of self-care is often the best way to ground yourself, to breathe, to reassess, to reflect, and then get back in the game and be the best leader that you can be in any area of your life. So Natacha is a great role model for other mums, and I love her idea of always creating a buffer in the day, whether it's grounding yourself by breathing, having switch off routines, having transition routines. I hope that you find time to find buffers in your day to reflect. And I'm really working on this to get myself out of the busy, crazy zone, to stop, to breathe, and get back into the moment and remember what's important. Good luck, guys. Love you. Have a great week. And remember, guys, stay curious.
That's a good lesson, especially for kids.
You think so, Oliver?
Yeah, I do.
Later.